We're going to take a look at the CSB Study Bible. The CSB stands for the Christian Standard Bible. This is a Baptist Bible translation. It's kind of like you have the ESV, which is sort of a Reformed Baptist. The CSB is the more Southern Baptist. So if you're a Baptist, you have your choice of Bibles, or you can just say, nope, the King James was good enough for St. Paul, is good enough for me. So after a few years of seeing how the CSB was received, Holman Publishers came out with the CSB Study Bible. It used to be called the HCSB Study Bible, but again, that's a little too wordy. So CSB rolls off the tongue a little nicer. I have the hardcover personal sized edition because I like smaller Bibles. I don't want something taking up a ton of shelf real estate. Also because I can read pretty easily close up. It's when things get far away that my eyes turn into that of a 90-year-old man. It clocks in at 2,146 pages. Some of the scholars whose work has gone into this thing include Kenneth Matthews, Richard Hess, Dwayne Garrett, Dennis Cole, Tremper Longman, my old professor Walt Kaiser, Daniel Block, Kenneth Kitchen, Gary Habermas, Craig Evans, Ed Stetzer, Dan Wallace, Craig Blomberg, all from within various Baptist traditions, but some serious scholarship has gone into this, and a number of these are people whose work I regularly use and consult. Now, one of the really cool features about the notes, and whenever there's a key word, Hebrew or Greek, it tells you how to pronounce it in Hebrew. It tells you how the CSB has translated that same Hebrew or Greek word in different passages, because sometimes context determines how you translate a word. It tells you how many times it's used in the Old or the New Testament. It gives you a good example, a focus passage where that term is found that'll give you an understanding of it. And then it gives you a definition with all of the semantic range of what the word means. When you're studying the Bible, understanding the words that the authors use, the actual Hebrew and Greek words, is indispensable sometimes. It brings out so much of the text. Now, it doesn't mean you have to know Greek or Hebrew in order to understand the message of the Bible. What it does mean, though, is the more you know Greek or Hebrew, the greater appreciation you can have for what's actually being taught in many passages of Scripture. And so as a preacher, as a teacher, as a serious student of the Bible, having something that gives you access to the original language, even if it's just to certain key terms, is incredibly beneficial. The one thing that annoys me, though, let me just nitpick for a second, they don't actually give you the Hebrew or the Greek. I would like to see the actual Hebrew word or the Greek word. CSB, you went to all that trouble to put this feature in, but you couldn't have just written the Hebrew word, right there. You have so much room to do it. Or the Greek word in the New Testament. Why? Why, guys? Come on, get it together. That's my recommendation for the updated edition. Put the Hebrew and the Greek in there. Don't make me get out my pitchfork. There are a series of essays on how to study the Bible, how to read the Bible for transformation, and also how we got the Bible. How the text came about. These are good opening essays that give you the background to how we got this thing and how we should approach it to begin with. I think it's really helpful, especially to have it right up front at the beginning. The CSB also does a good job in terms of illustration. They have really high quality, not just illustration reconstructions, but also actual photographs. And there's a ton of these type of essays with illustrations. There's full color maps. The notes in this are excellent. Commentary level notes. Each book has its own introduction with a full color photograph at the beginning, and then outline of the content and an overall introduction of what you're going to find when you read that book. There's a great essay on the history between the Testaments, the intertestamental period, that tells all about what happened between the Old Testament and the New Testament. A lot of times that gets left out of Bibles, and you think, we turned the page from Malachi to Matthew and we're just continuing as if nothing happened. No, major things happened between the Old and the New Testament. And so a good study Bible fills you in on those things, and the CSB does an excellent job of that. One of my favorite things about the CSB translation itself, and it's a good translation. I actually really like the CSB. I prefer the CSB over the ESV, actually. And one thing that they do really well in the CSB that's cool is whenever there's a quote in the New Testament of an Old Testament passage, whenever the New Testament quotes the Old Testament, the translators have put the quote in bold print. So you can visually see when the New Testament authors are quoting from the Old Testament. Super helpful. And then they put the reference to the verse they're quoting in a footnote right underneath it. That's really helpful when you're studying the Bible, because knowing how the New Testament uses the Old Testament is one of the most important concepts to understand in all of biblical studies. The CSB study notes allow for different interpretations of Genesis. That's really important, because some people read Genesis and they just assume that what the view they've always believed, that's what every Christian believes. And that's not the case. There are a number of different views on Genesis. CSB does a good job, the notes in it, of presenting those different views and not even really focusing on those views. It really points out how the language of the text, especially Genesis 1, is fluid and allows for a degree of ambiguity, which is a very good thing for people that are studying the text. And then, for instance, in the story of Noah, it actually talks about, was the flood global? Was the flood more localized? And it allows for both of those interpretations because the text allows for both of those interpretations. Stereotypically, people might expect a more fundamentalist or literalist reading of the text. And so it's really cool and refreshing to see the CSB study notes reflecting the wide range of thought that Baptists as well as other Christians have when they come to the Genesis text. On the issue of historicity of the Exodus, the CSB notes lean to the early dating, which is the more traditional dating of the Exodus, the 1400s BC, rather than the 1200s BC dating. They don't make a big deal of it, and they do note that both of those views are held by scholars, but the notes in it do lean towards the early view. They also do a good job of pointing out the ambiguity of the route of the Exodus, where exactly Israel crossed the Red Sea, where Mount Sinai is. They even have a possible location of Mount Sinai in Saudi Arabia, which is nice to see. Again, I think that's where it is. They also do a really good job of putting you visually into the Exodus account. They have, for instance, a good illustration of the tabernacle here, of the garments that the priests would have worn. Stuff that helps, because these parts of Exodus can get really tedious for people that are new to the text or don't really know what's going on. In terms of Romans chapter 7 that we've talked about, where Christians, interpreters are divided on whether Paul in Romans 7 is talking about his own ongoing struggle with sin, which is the Augustinian view, or whether he is taking on the persona of someone who has not been regenerated by the Holy Spirit and is living a life dominated by sin, which is the more Eastern view and Orthodox view. The notes in the CSB Study Bible do give both views, and they give the reasons that Christians hold both views, though they ultimately lean towards, they come down on the Augustinian view, which is not surprising for a Baptist publication. Another section in Romans where there's a lot of differences among Christians is chapters 9 through 11, where Paul starts talking about the election of Israel and what that means in terms of salvation, not just for Israel, but for Gentiles and for the world. There are Baptists who are Calvinist in their theology, and there are Baptists who are free will or non-Calvinist, Arminian in their theology. And the CSB does a good job of not really pushing either view, of kind of letting you decide. And then in terms of the relationship between Israel and the church, that's another issue, Romans chapter 11, where Christians are pretty divided at times. And you have Christians who believe that Israel and the church together are one people of God. And you have some Christians who really push for a distinction between Israel, like ethnic Israel, and the church, the people of God. They lean a little more towards a progressive dispensationalism, and that's an issue where Christians disagree, and there are good interpretive arguments that people have put forth for both positions. The CSB doesn't really spell that out. They kind of just lean into that one view when it comes to Romans chapter 11, which again is not surprising for a predominantly Baptist publication. You do see a little bit more of the Calvinist or Reformed leanings when you get to the book of Ephesians. There's those of you that are theology nerds, they push for the P in tulip. So just be aware, you're going to get they're not over the top in terms of being solely Reformed, solely Calvinistic, but they do lean that way. Another bias that you're going to see in the CSB study notes has to do with their complementarianism. So when it comes to passages on the roles of women, you're pretty much only get the complementarian reading, whereas in other study Bibles that we've looked at, you get complementarian and non-complementarian readings. But again, this is a Baptist position. Most, not all, but most Baptists are complementarian, so it's not surprising. And they're not heavy-handed complementarian, but just know that that's the bias going into it. So if you're from a Pentecostal tradition, a Methodist tradition, something that is non-complementarian, that does allow for women in ministry and preaching and teaching roles, then you're going to find yourself at odds with some of the notes in the CSB Study Bible. I actually think this is a helpful study Bible for those of us outside of the Baptist traditions to have, because it gives us access to the best in Baptist thought and Baptist scholarship. And I think that's the way to go. I like learning from people outside of my theological tradition, but not a caricature of what they believe, like what they actually believe. The best of different views, I think it's important to take in. And CSB Study Bible does a good job with that. So would I recommend the CSB Study Bible? Yeah, actually, it's a really, really good study Bible. I like it a lot. It's not the easiest study Bible in terms of if you're a new Christian or a new believer. If you don't have some familiarity with the concept of biblical theology or biblical scholarship, then some of the notes, some of the essays, they're going to be kind of on a shelf you may not be able to reach. But overall, for somebody who's a motivated believer, for somebody who's a passionate layperson, a Bible study teacher, a pastor, a seminary student, a college student, yeah, this is a great Bible to have on the shelf. So I do recommend it. And I'm not even Baptist.